Good afternoon, guys. Discussion A deals with when you lose a parent. These are the 9 steps of grief no one warned you about. Okay, so we're going to go through those today for A. Please join me for the presentation. Sit back and enjoy, please. Okay, here we go. Here's a clear, grounded explanation of the headline. When you lose a parent, these are the 9 types of grief no one warned you about, based directly on the page you are viewing. I'm drawing only from the content in your open tab. Okay, what the headline is preparing you for. The headline signals that the article is not about the expected parts of grief, crying, sadness, waves, but about the unexpected, unspoken, and often disorientating forms of grief. That show up after a parent dies. The surrounding page content makes this clear by opening with vivid scene. The author standing in her kitchen the morning after her mother's death, performing the same routine but feeling like the world is suddenly wrong. This sets the tone. Grief is not just emotional pain. It's a rupture in reality. What the page reveals about these 9 types of grief. The article begins listing them with the first one. Number 1, you grieve the person you can't call anymore. This is the grief of losing the everyday relationship, the check-ins, the advice. The simple act of reaching for the phone is not just the loss of a parent, it's the loss of connection that shaped your daily life. The rest of the list isn't shown yet, but the surrounding content gives strong clues about the themes the article is exploring. The author describes grief that shows up in ordinary routines. The coffee making moment is a perfect example. The world looks looks the same, but you are not. Grief that feels out of sync. The world, the sun rises, neighbors now mow lawns, work emails arrive, yet your internal world has exploded. This mismatch becomes its own kind of pain. Grief that lasts longer than anyone warns you about. People told her grief comes in waves, but no one told her how long those waves would last, or how they'd appear in unexpected places. Grief that becomes part of your identity. A related article on the page describes prolonged grief as something that can become a strand of your DNA, reinforcing the idea that some losses, especially a parent, reshape who you are. Grief that is cumulative and foundational. The page notes that some deaths shake the foundations of a human being more than others. Losing a parent often reactivates earlier losses and destabilizes one's sense of self. What the headline really means in context. The article is naming the hidden curriculum of parental loss. The parts no one prepares you for. The grief embedded in daily routines. The grief of losing your witness, your historian. The grief of becoming the older generation. The grief of unsolved dynamics. The grief that lingers long after others expect you to be better. The grief that reshapes your identity. The grief that feels invisible to the outside world. The tone of the page is intimate, validating, and grounded in lived experience. It's not clinical, it's human. It's saying if you've lost a parent, you already know these forms of grief, even if no one ever named them for you. Okay, second headline, guys. What the headline is promising. The headline, the 12 types of grief no one warned you about that have nothing to do with death. Signals an article that names and normalizes losses people commonly experience but rarely recognize as grief. Losses that don't come with funerals, sympathy cards, or clear social permission to mourn. The surrounding page content frames grief as a broader uh, as broader than bereavement, everyday ruptures, endings, and unmet expectations can produce the same heavy, disorientating feelings as death. The kinds of non-death grief the page highlights. The article collects common, often invisible losses people carry across the sources on the page. These typically include losses of a relationship, breakup, divorce, estrangement, loss of a job or career, identity, layoff, forced retirement, career change, loss of health or ability, chronic illness, disability, aging, loss of a dream or future plan, failed goals, infertility, canceled plans, loss of a role or identity, becoming an empty nester, retirement, or role reversal. Loss of a pet, loss of community or belonging, moving, cultural displacement, social exclusion, loss after trauma or abuse, the person you were before the trauma, ambiguous or anticipatory loss, a loved one's cognitive decline, long illness, loss of safety or financial security, bankruptcy, eviction, loss of routine or normalcy, pandemic disruptions, major life transitions. Disenfranchised grief, grief others don't validate or recognize. These categories are drawn from the article's list and from similar roundups on the page that map grief beyond death to everyday life changes. Why these types are often overlooked. The page explains two main reasons why they go unnamed. No public ritual or language. Society has clear scripts for grief. For mourning, a death, it lacks scripts. For grieving, a job loss, a broken promise, or a faded identity, so people feel isolated and ashamed. Grief can be ambiguous and cumulative. Small losses accumulate and reactivate earlier wounds. So the emotional weight feels disproportionate and confusing, professionals on the page note that these losses can be just as heavy as bereavement, even when they're socially invisible. How the page frames responding to these losses. The tone across the page is validating and practical. It names the losses, normalizes the feelings, and points readers toward ways to acknowledge and process them. Talking about the loss, seeking therapy or coaching, creating personal rituals, and asking for practical support. The content treats grief as legitimate responses to many kinds of endings, not only death. Grief isn't only for funerals. Endings of many kinds can produce deep sorrow and disorientation. Naming the loss helps. Calling what you feel grief can reduce the shame and open the door to support. Practical steps matter. Small rituals, honest conversations, and professional help are common recommendations on the page. Okay, guys, that is A for you. I will be back on shortly with B. For now, Gator Wellness. Take care, folks. I'll be back on with B shortly.